In my garden, I had to dig a lot for roses, and I had to do a lot of soil amending. Also, I had to wage war against invasive Japanese beetles and spotted lanternflies. Yuck. And then there's that worry of crown gall disease.
I can ruin your roses.
Considering all the work and everything that could go wrong, why would anyone plant roses? Well, because of this. Just look at that. I mean, it's amazing. This is a David Austin English rose called Crown Princess Margarita. In this video, you'll see an entire year of growth from spring to fall of several roses I planted this year. Both bare root and potted roses here in the northeast of America, Zone 6 in New Jersey. So here they are, freshly planted in spring. It's still quite cold, very early in spring, and they're all looking very small. Most of these are bare roots. This is Dee-Lish bare root. Unfortunately, it got rose crown gall, and all of these Dee-Lish bare roots actually got it. So I know it came from a certain seller. Anyway, so this is the spring flush. This is when they've leafed out and they're producing their first blooms. Boscabelle is on the left here, then Ancient Mariner. To the right is actually a potted Olivia Austin rose I planted last year, so it has an advantage. It has like a whole year or even more of growth on it. This is Dee-Lish with the crown gall I haven't discovered yet, and this is Belinda's Dream. And the two on the right, the reddish ones, were here when we moved in. So, really looking good for first year bare roots so far. There's Boscabelle. Ancient Mariner's putting out a few more flowers. Olivia Austin starting to turn white, which I did not like. And that's why I actually removed Olivia Austin rose. Olivia Austin looks pretty good here, but I didn't like the blooms turning so white, then turning brown, and then not dropping cleanly off of the bush. I wanted more color, and while I was at it, more fragrance. It's just my personal preference. It's a beautiful, healthy rose, though. Here is Boscabelle turning orange a little bit. It's the summer now. Ancient Mariner behind Boscabelle has pretty much stopped flowering, but looks very healthy. Look what happened to Boscabelle. It bolted straight up and then quietly lost all of its leaves at the bottom. I'm disappointed that it's so naked. I really want a full bush here, but look at those flowers. The flowers are so good. So I'm going to be extra patient with this rose. If I haven't mentioned it already, my conditions are not perfect for roses. I really could use a lot more sun. So considering this, I think they've done pretty good so far. I'm going to show you a little bit of a close-up on what the roses are doing. You can see how Boscabelle is so different from Ancient Mariner. Ancient Mariner grows low and almost sideways, and it's super healthy. There are these little green caterpillars that like to eat my broccoli, but they also like to eat roses. So if you see a lot of holes and leaves missing, usually from the tips of your roses, check for these caterpillars first. You'll usually find them just resting somewhere and they're camouflaged with their green color, but you'll be able to spot them if you just give a look over your roses once in a while. I just pick them off and step on them. This Boscobel rose has 3 of them curled up on it. Since I don't want Boscobel to lose even more leaves, I pick them off whenever I see them. Here is James Galway Rose by David Austin. It's a climbing rose, and I planted it inside the vegetable garden so it can grow on the fence, the welded wire fence. It's not in the best conditions. It does get a little shade, but I think it did pretty good for the year. Here it is at the beginning, and I'll show you how it looks after a little while. It actually blooms pretty well. It has a really nice spring flush, and the flowers are really pretty. I did not notice a strong fragrance, but I did detect some fragrance, which was very nice. And after the full spring bloom, I got a few blooms here and there, really hardly anything, but it is the first year, so I will be patient. Okay, so now what you're seeing is the beginning of fall, and you can see the amount of growth it's had. And like I said, it doesn't get, all day sun, so we can't judge it too harshly, and I think some more patience will be needed. But I think it will look really nice next year. If you could really see it, but most of the growth is towards the right, and that's where the sun rises. And it doesn't really grow towards the left because by the end of the day, that's where all the shade is. The trees are blocking the sunset and such. This one is Desdemona, another rose by David Austin. Basically, it gets morning sun, and not even the earliest morning sun, but just part of the morning sun to about like 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So, for that amount of sun, it's pretty good. It's very fragrant. Of course, it did not flower a lot, and the blooms were on the small side, but it did flower some. Okay, so here we have 2 Eustacia Vies, one on the left and one on the right, Boscobel in the middle, and in the back there is Eden Rose, Pierre de Ronsard climbing rose on that metal trellis. Eustacia Vi bloomed once, very nicely, but then didn't do much afterwards. Also, the flowers turned pretty much white, which I'm not a big fan of. But the fragrance was really nice, so I'm going to try to cut some of the crepe myrtle limbs off so it gets a little bit more sun next year, and hopefully it will bloom more. This is Eden Rose, Pierre de Ronsard. I got this from Heirloom Roses. It was such a puny, tiny little thing, and it's grown so quickly. It flowers great. It flowered more than any of these David Austin roses, surprisingly. Again, maybe it just takes the shade better. But later in the season, the leaves started to show some kind of problem. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's a mineral deficiency or something, because it is planted so close to the foundation. Hopefully it will resolve itself next year. See, some of these leaves are really pale and blotchy. Aside from that, I'm really happy with this rose. It's just so beautiful, even though it doesn't have fragrance. It's vigorous, it's taking shade well, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it does here. I planted 4 sensuous roses, 2 on this corner of the vegetable garden and 2 on the other. This one is flowering first because it gets a little bit more sun. Sensuous rose is a very fragrant rose. You can cut them and bring them indoors. Even when it's cool out, they still have a great fragrance. It doesn't hold on to its pink color as well as, for example, Double Pink Knockout does, but it's not too bad. And just look at those ruffles. Who doesn't like a ruffled rose? I ordered 3 of these potted roses from Jackson and Perkins. All 3 arrived nice and healthy. Unfortunately, one will die because of a couple of factors. The first issue is they ship them so early in spring, which is not a big deal generally, but for these little roses, they were more sensitive to the cold. So 2 survived the frosts, but the third one did not, and that was the one that was also chewed by rabbits. They really chewed this one, and then when the frost came in, it kind of just sealed its fate and it did not recover. And there's always this third factor in my garden anyway. I mean, I try to amend the soil so the drainage is better, but I also have a sunlight issue. I don't have all day sun from morning to sunset. Some of my roses don't get any morning sun and they get blasted by the hot afternoon sun, and then the late afternoon sun they don't really get either. So it's kind of harsh conditions in my yard, so it's hard to judge the roses fairly. So if they're doing really good, that means they're like superhero types of roses because of all the challenges that we have here. So here is Princess Charlene DeMonico. This is 1 full season of growth. It's now October. It kind of grew straight up. It didn't lose too many leaves, so that's pretty good. Hardly any flowers. It gets a little bit less sun than a lot of the other roses, but it's hanging in there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to it next year. Down this way is the other one over here. I don't know if I got suckered into buying another Boscobel rose, but I saw all these beautiful pictures of it, so I decided to add yet another Boscobel rose to my garden. And just look at it. I really like how it's pruned. It has such an open vase shape here. Nice, healthy, thick canes and healthy leaves. It's a nice big rose, but it's probably the most expensive rose I ever bought online or even locally. I'm going to show you the special spot I have ready for this rose. It's been ready for a while. This spot is one of the sunniest places I have. Plus, it has kind of built-in protection from deer somewhat because it's close to the house, and the deer generally prefer to stay away from the house. Unless they're really desperate for some tasty rose leaves, I guess. When this rose arrived, it was very hot and sunny, but I didn't want to wait to plant it. You know, when you're in the mood to get something done, you just want to get it done. Even if it's a little extra work, well, this is what happened in this instance. So what I did was put an old umbrella on top of a shepherd's hook just to give it a little bit of shade. So I can get it planted right away, but it can also give it some protection from that hot sun. I only did it for 1 day. Maybe it helped or maybe it wasn't needed. By the way, you see those hollyhocks, those little tiny plants I planted right next to Boscobel in the back there? That was a big mistake. Those hollyhocks got huge. I'll show you later in this video. The hollyhocks were way too close to the rose. Look at that first flush of blooms. Unfortunately, that's the best it's going to look all year. You'll see what I mean a little later in this video. This is just its first year, so maybe it will make a great improvement next year. In the summertime, this basketball lost a lot of leaves too. Look how big those hollyhocks I planted in spring got. They were growing into basketball, at least the back of it, so I trimmed a lot of the hollyhock leaves off. It's a little bit ironic because all spring I was protecting them because they kept getting eaten by rabbits or groundhogs or whatever. They're a biannual, which means they last 2 years and usually only flower in their second year. But I planted mine so early indoors and nurtured them, and now it looks like there are buds for this year. The only problem is we're already getting light frosts, which means the flowers might get destroyed by the cold. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. These are 3 more roses I found locally. One is a basketball, and these 2 are Crown Princess Margaritas. I read such great things about this rose, I decided to get a 3rd one. That's the one you saw at the beginning of this video. I found it interesting how each one grew differently depending on the conditions I gave it, and I'll show you that in a little while. Okay, so this is that potted basketball when it started to flower. Look at those luscious cupcake blooms. They are so pretty. I just wish this rose was happier in my yard. Here's the first of the Crown Princess Margarita roses I planted. It blooms such good blooms because it has all that energy that it stored from last year growing in some beautiful sunny location. But now that it's in my yard, it's not getting enough sun, so it barely grew. It pretty much stayed the same size all year, and it grew like 1 cane towards the sun for a little bit, like 2 feet, and that's about it. But I'm going to see what happens in spring. At least with Gertrude Jekyll, which is on the left side there, that flowers so good, at least in the spring, and not much else. But again, it gets very little sun here, so any blooms at all are very appreciated in this location. Okay, so that yellow rose is actually the poet's wife in that planter, which I'll talk more about later. And I just want to show you this Brindabella Purple Prince rose really quick. Anyway, so I actually planted the other Crown Princess Margaret next to the gazebo. I don't know if you could see, I tied it with some twine there. This Crown Princess Margaret did a lot better than the first one because it gets a little bit more sun here. I'm trying to train it up the gazebo. Here's the last Crown Princess Margarita, and this one gets a little bit more sun than the other 2. I realized that sunlight was getting through the trees in the morning and in the late afternoon, just enough to make this rose grow a little bit stronger and better. It went from this soft lemon yellow color to a soft sherbet peachy color. I'm amazed that that's the same rose. I think this rose has an exceptional fragrance too. I really like it. Look how much better it's doing over here. It started to put on growth almost right away. It's hard to judge a rose without providing ideal conditions for it. Even I've been guilty of judging a rose For example, I harshly judged Abraham Darby rose because I didn't realize what was going on underground. It wasn't getting enough drainage. It seems like common sense now, but I was pretty surprised at the difference a few extra hours of sunlight could make, even if that sunlight was only dappled sunlight. It's that time of year again. Roses are at the top of their menu. So I put a little fencing there for now. It's not enough to really protect them, but it will slow them down. Winter's coming, but they can still put on a little bit more growth for next year, at least underground. This is Summer Romance I planted late last fall, and the plant was kind of small. It gets a little bit of morning sun and then a little bit of afternoon sun. It had this beautiful flush of spring flowers and then nothing much after that. I started to worry about this rose because of the sunlight situation, but at the end of the season, when the temperatures started to cool down, it sent up one long cane, which I trained to the arbor. So it did something this year. This Abraham Darby rose came from Heirloom Roses. It was such a tiny little thing, but you know, it's been growing. I did have a setback because I realized I did not amend the soil enough. So long story short, I pretty much dug it up, amended the soil with a whole bunch of perlite, also some humusy compost type soil, lots of really fast draining soil. After doing this, I noticed a tremendous improvement. It's still a slow grower for me, but that could be because of the sunlight issue with the trees in the morning and the trees in the afternoon. Despite that, it still bloomed these big, thick, amazing blooms that smelled wonderful. Here's another Abraham Darby rose on this side of the gazebo. I planted this one at the same time. We've had some light freezes so far, which actually kind of ruined the blooms of some of the roses on Sensuous and Dee-Lish, for example. Here's a quick look at one of the Sensuous roses with cold damage to the petals. Also, I found Dee-Lish rose to be really delicate so far anyway. The rose petals get damaged from cold and also extremely high temperatures quite easily, but it could just be its first year in the ground. In contrast, look what's going on with this Abraham Darby rose. It's gone through an interesting color change, but most importantly, no frost damage. So you've got a beautiful rose that's heat resistant, cold resistant, and intensely fragrant. I think this might be my favorite rose. The Poet's Wife is an intensely fragrant rose as well. It lost a lot of leaves. I'm not sure if it just didn't like the location, or it had something to do with the heat of the pot, or not enough water. So I decided to plant it in the ground, and I'll show you where I did that. I don't know what your yard soil is like, but ours is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. You could get random pieces of metal, broken bottles, or a whole bunch of rocks, or maybe even a big tree root. This poet's wife rose is not much to look at now, but I think it's going to look amazing next year. I decided I wanted to make this a really special place with a bird bath. Something positioned so it would be visible through the window all throughout our long winter. So that was my first year experience with bare root roses and other potted roses. I hope you'll stick around to see how these roses progress and also how the rest of the garden does too.